Hi there, it's Professor Eric Steinhardt, and let's talk about cannabis and asceticism. Asceticism might seem like a strange concept, but it's one that's played a large role in the history of cannabis. And what would that be? What does asceticism mean? Asceticism is a kind of renunciation of the dominant social order, right? We all find ourselves in a society. It has values and a pattern of life that's the standard or conventional pattern of life for people, right? You might say that a society has values like valuing competition and domination, or acquiring material things and money and power and status. Or it has a dominant social pattern like you're supposed to follow that pattern. You're supposed to, get an education, get married, get a job, start a family, buy a house, buy products, be a consumer. And so you might say that American society is materialistic, that it values money and competition for money. And so there are people who can't fit in to the dominant pattern, right? The dominant social pattern. And they experience the dominant social order as a threat to their own personal identity and personal way of life, right? People who differ in ways that are not the norm, not the standard norm, right? Norm meaning normal in a kind of moral or compelling sense, right? So, okay. What do you do if you find yourself in a society where you just can't fit in with the dominant values? You don't want to compete with people to make money. You're not interested in acquiring material goods and getting a bigger house and a bigger car and struggling with others, right? You experience all these things as threatening because they are different than your values. All right, so asceticism then is a kind of response to this feeling of social threat, that the dominant social norms and patterns and way of life is a threat to your identity, right? This again, of course, is going to be relevant to cannabis in terms of cannabis being connected with the perception of social threats or just threats in general, and how cannabis turns down, right? It dampens down the appearance or perception of threat. So now when we come to asceticism, right, there's going to be two kinds of asceticism. One is disruptive asceticism, where people who are ascetics simply renounce the dominant social order and they don't try to form their own new social order. They live like wild animals, right? And the ancient Greeks had these kinds of ascetics. They were called cynics. The word cynic means dog. They lived like wild dogs. Diogenes was a famous cynic, right? He lived in a barrel. He didn't wear any clothes. He masturbated in public. He had sex with women in this intersections of the streets. And he did all this just sort of to mock the dominant social order and the way people lived. Later on, as Christianity emerged, you had Christian anchorites, and they often, they renounced society. They went to live in the wilderness. They didn't want to live with other people. They mortified their bodies. They didn't eat. They didn't have sex. They whipped themselves. They, did all kinds of things that were kind of strange, like that, renunciatory things. In Hinduism, you have some ascetics that are the Agori sadhus. Sadhus are generally like, ascetics. They're kind of like monks or nuns. The Agoris are a particularly extreme sect. They live, again, sort of like the cynics. And that's, just disruptive. They're not trying to do something new. They're just rebelling against the dominant social order without trying to construct a new one. That alternative to that is constructive asceticism, where, okay, the people renounce the dominant social order. They say, I don't want to participate in this. I don't want to be a capitalist or accumulate wealth or get married and have a family, the nuclear family. But they also try to build a better social order. They're not just disruptive. They want to build utopian communities or ideal societies or communities for themselves to live in. In the Platonic tradition, right, Plato wanted to found an ideal city, sometimes called Magnesia, means great city. Plotinus wanted to found a similar city-state, Platonopolis, right, almost got the Roman emperor to do it, to help him do that. The utopian drive appears then in, Christian monasteries and convents where they actually do build institutions where people can live. In America, the United States, you have lots of utopian communities, the Shakers, the Amana communities. So, utopianism and a desire to construct an alternative social order, right? Lots of these utopian communities, everyone owns all their property in common. In some of them, like the Amana communities, right, or the Shakers, right, you have different sexual relations. Shakers didn't have sex, whereas some other utopian communities in America had common marriage, right? All the adults were sort of married to every other adult in the community, and they could all have sex with each other. They didn't have marriage where they thought like, oh, if you're just married to one woman or one man, then you're treating them like property, like you own their body. And so they had free love, right? So this brings us to cannabis and constructive asceticism. Cannabis has long been associated with constructive asceticism. It turns down the social threat you feel from the dominant social order, and it can help ascetics with social bonding, because it might be that ascetics who feel alienated by the dominant social order have a very high sensitivity to social threat. They're like, I can't live in this world, I'm threatened. Okay, we turn that down a little bit, and then they can become more sociable, right? So in Hinduism, you have the Shaivite sadhus, the sadhus that worship Shiva, and those sadhus were among the first to start to use cannabis in this ascetic way. Lots of Hindu sadhus, Shaivite sadhus, come to Jamaica. They're brought there by the British Empire, right? In the 1800s, late 1800s, they're brought to Jamaica, and they inspire the Rastafarians. Right? People often think the Rastafarians came out of nowhere. They didn't. The Rastafarian cultures is a merger of Hindu Shaivite sadhuism, a kind of biblical Judaism, and an unusual sort of Christianity. But lots of things people associate with Rastafarians, like the dreadlocked hair and things like that, that comes from the Hindu sadhus. Right. And, that kind of and the use of cannabis also comes from the sadhus who brought cannabis to Jamaica. And so the Rastafarians emerge as a utopian movement. They want to build their own communes, kind of separatist. They can be free from the oppression that they feel, the racial and economic oppression that they feel. Of course, Jamaica has this history with the slave trade, and they want to break away from all this toxic history. And so they use cannabis in religious rituals. But these rituals are intended to form social bonds, to help them form a new kind of utopian or idealistic community. You get this again, right, in the American hippie movement, where the hippies didn't just want to smoke pot and live like wild animals. They wanted to build new societies. And so lots of hippies formed communes, right? Some of which are still active today, right? For instance, a great example was the Farm in Tennessee, in which cannabis consumption was central to lots of social bonding rituals. So one of the many uses of cannabis that humans have made of it, right? One of the central uses is for ascetic community building, for building ideal utopian communities. Cannabis is used to turn down that social threat and to increase social bonding. And it's also used as a way of saying, look, we're not like those other people. We don't value competition, striving for money, the endless lust for wealth and power, right? Cannabis makes us more relaxed. It lets us, laugh and talk and, chill out with each other and be together in a community of joy, not a community and cooperation, not a community of competition and domination. So cannabis has been used ascetically for a long time to build alternative communities that strive for different sorts of ideals and utopian values. Thanks for thinking about cannabis and asceticism. I'm Eric Steinhardt, and there's lots more to think about with cannabis.